Hey guys, Julian here, and today, as you can see, I've got some new lighting going on, trying out a little bit of different stuff. Let me know how you like this. And today, I'm going to be showing you how to make deep minimal house like I.O. Mulen. As usual, you get the full project file and samples and MIDI and presets. Everything that I'm about to show you from this video is available right at the top of the description for just $5 on my Bandcamp. And if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. And yeah, let's dive in. This is the loop that you heard in the intro. We're at 126 BPM, a little bit faster for house like this, especially like something you would call deep house. But with the style, it works well because you have all this percussion happening. And even like, just the bass line is very skippy. And so having like all of this stuff going at a faster BPM like this, I think works really well with the style. But yeah, so the first sound that we have here is the pad, the first pad, which sounds like this. So what we got going on here is you can see this is just playing a D minor 9 chord. We're in the key of D minor, and yeah, this is a D minor 9 chord. This works really well with this style. Usually, like with this style, we have these more kind of smooth, jazzy chords. You don't want to just use like a regular minor chord. Like this is what a regular minor chord would sound like. And as you can hear, it just doesn't have that same kind of chill, like type of atmosphere that you get with the minor 9 chord. Or you could use a major 9 chord, or a major 7th, or a minor 7th, or any other kind of like different type of shape like this. But yeah, just kind of add something a little bit more. And all this is to make this chord is it's just a regular D minor chord. You can see these bottom 3 notes. It's just root note, minor 3rd, 5th, and then we add a minor 7th, and then a 9th on top of that. And then, yeah, that's how you get the minor 9th chord. It's really not that complicated because you can see it kind of follows this pattern. This is how I like to look at it. Is like, you can see we have 2 notes between these two, 3 notes between these two, 2 notes between these two, 3 notes between these two. So if you always follow that, it's not really that hard to make these kinds of more interesting chords, But yeah, and then for the sound on this one, it's made using a sample. So what I've done here is I've got this sample of this pad in here, and then I've just got a long loop of it inside of the simpler. As you can see, we've got the fade up, I've got it set like this. And yeah, this is how you do these kinds of pads like you hear in these tracks. It's basically just a sound like this where it has some movement over time. And then you're just hearing that loop back over and over. And yeah, that's how you get these kinds of like evolving kind of smooth pads like you hear in tracks like Flute and, that kind of just deeper vibe. And yeah, so then we got that. Then I just have a bit of just to fatten it up a little bit. I have a compressor side chaining it to the kick. And then finally, we just have a high pass filter cutting out the low end. And that is it for the first pad. The next sound we have here is the second pad, which sounds like this. So what this one's doing is it just kind of plays every 2 bars, as you can see. It just kind of like mixes it up a little bit because if you just had these other pads going the whole way through, you can hear it gets kind of monotonous. But if you have this come in, you can hear it just kind of mixes it up a little bit. So some notes on this one, it's really simple. It's just playing D and F. So basically, if you think of a D minor chord, this is just the first 2 notes, the root note, the minor 3rd, and then we have a high D up here. So, just kind of playing around with the D minor chord to make something a little bit more interesting. That's like not just the same D minor chord, but the voices are kind of arranged in a different way. With this one, you can see it's also just another pad sample like this. I've got this being inside a simpler here. And yeah, you can see we just got the fade up a little bit. I've got the length and the start time set like that. Again, just like a long pad sample like this, and like it's constantly looping back. We've got this one going through a bit of reverb and then a bit of saturation to fatten it up, and this also brings out the reverb. And then we have this phaser on here. So the phaser sounds really cool. This gives it more movement, because here's without it. And then with it, you can hear so this thing is kind of like morphing and like moving around in texture throughout the track. And yeah, so that's just set like this. We got the LFO on there. You can see, and then the last thing we have here is just a compressor, side chaining it to the kick, and that is it for the second pad. The next sound we have here is this choir pad, which sounds like this. So this is playing the same chord that the first pad was playing. You can see it's just that same D minor 9. And then with this one, we have this choir sample. So the idea here is this kind of fills it out, because just with that first pad, it sounds good. But it doesn't have a lot of like mid-range, and it doesn't really have like a lot of those kind of just warm frequencies. So when we add this, you can hear they really complement each other nicely. And yeah, this is the idea with layering. You know, if you're layering, you never want to just layer things just to layer them, but we're layering them together because they complement each other and because they add something you can't get with just one sound on its own. So this one, just like the others, is just pad sample being looped with the fade. Then we have a bit of drum bus to fatten it up, a compressor sidechaining into the kick, and a high pass filter. It's really simple, you know. Again, just another smooth chord playing underneath everything. After that, we have these stabs, which sound like this. So you can hear these two are playing off of each other. We have this more like bassy stab. This is just playing D, and then you can see what we've got here is a simple FM sound. It's just 3 sine waves. This is like a standard sort of quote-unquote donk type of bass. Yeah, you can see just some FM synthesis, got the envelope set like that, so it's a little bit more plucky. Then it has like going through a bit of chorus and a bit of drum bus and a high pass filter. Pretty simple sound. Then we have the second one, which this one's just playing a D minor chord, same chord that you saw with the other pads. And then with this one, it's made using analog. So you can hear this is more of like a kind of like smooth chord. What it is you can see it's just 2 saw waves going into a low pass filter. The low pass has an envelope on it, making it plucky. And we also have a little bit of an LFO on that. So we get some movement, you know, so it's not just the exact same thing. It's subtle, but you notice this in the background. Even if you don't know, like, really what's going on in the track, like, if you're a listener who isn't a producer, your brain hears this, and it lets you know, like, okay, the producer did something here to keep this interesting. We've got the amp envelope set like this, a little bit plucky, just like you saw. And then with the filter envelope, then we just have a bit of chorus and a bit of reverb. You can see the reverb's pretty small. And yeah, so the idea of these is just to kind of add some more like rhythmic movement, because if I turn these off, you can hear the pads on their own. It works, but it feels like it's missing some sort of depth or like an extra layer. So that's what these add. Just kind of some more depth to the track. Stuff like this is important. This is the kind of stuff that you find like when you put your tracks up against reference tracks, and you know when you really start to try to make it sound like a professional track, you need to add little things like this just to kind of like mix it up in the track and make it so that it doesn't just, you know, have the same droning chords throughout the whole thing. Then after that, we've got the kick, which sounds like this. So this one's simple, just like a nice punchy sort of 909 style kick. This is what you would typically use in this style of like deeper minimal house. Got it going through a bit of drum bus. You can see we got the transients turned up to make that hit. And then I have this EQ8 here cutting out some mud. So here's without this. And then with it, you can hear it's subtle, but I noticed with a lot of I.O. Mulen's tracks, like he has a lot of these kind of like just deeper sounding kicks, and typically those low mid-range frequencies that I cut out there, if you leave those in, those don't really give it like a very deep sound. Those give it more of like a fat kind of like boxy sound. And so if you cut those out, you get this kind of deeper sound while still leaving in the fatness of the low end and like 100 hertz and the mid-range. And yeah, then after that we have the bass line, which sounds like this. So this bass line's really simple. It's just in D minor. Like I said, that's the key of the track. You can see we've got this playing D, and then it goes up to F. And then it does this little slide note here and there up to G, and there's like a few extra ones there. And yeah, so pretty simple bass line, but it just gives the track some movement. I think this kind of bass line is important because if you just had something that was like longer held out notes, the way I'm looking at this is we have a lot of droning sounds. We have a lot of sounds that are just very like, and even these, you know, are droning. So to have this bass line bouncing around between these 3 notes, and like be really alive and moving like this and jumping, it feels very good because there's a lot of dynamic range in the track, you know? You don't just have those like slower journeying chords. You have something underneath those to really keep it going. And I think it's important to keep this in mind when you're writing a track. Like, you know, if you have simple chords that are just journeying, write a jumping bass line. Maybe if you have some chords that are doing a whole bunch of extra stuff, keep the bass simple and more sticking to what that's doing. But yeah, so then for the sound on this one, it's a really simple FM sound. It's just 2 sine waves. You can see the key with this one is the second one is an octave down. So this is a good trick because if you turn up this chorus pitch, hear how the bass isn't quite as fat, but then when we bring it down, it's a really good way to get like a deep sine wave style bass while still having like some warmth in it. And yeah, then I have that low pass. Here's without it. And then with it, and yeah, then we just have a bit of saturation to fatten it up. I've got a compressor side chaining into the kick. And then we just have this EQ8 cutting at 100 hertz and giving it a little bit of a low end boost. This just helps to kind of clean out some room for the kick. I've got the kick and bass in a group together. This is a technique known as bussing. There's not a whole lot going on here. You can see it's pretty subtle, but it's just a little bit of extra stuff to kind of glue the kick and bass together. And the truth is, if you have really good, strong sounds, you don't need to do this. You know, it's like this kick is already very fat and this bass is already very fat, so you shouldn't need to do too much stuff, you know, throwing on like a lot of saturation or a lot of EQ. But just little subtle things like this do make a difference, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Here is without these two effects. And then with them, so you can hear the difference there. And why it's important, you know, it just gives it that extra little bit of oomph. So you can see, with this, we've got the drive up +3, and then I just have this EQ8 boosting the low end a little bit and cutting a little bit of low mid-range to cut out some mud. You can see it's very specified. The Q's up pretty high. And then we have this mid-range boost, and this just helps with kind of some fatness and some punch in the kick. I'll turn the mid-range boost off. And then with it, you can hear it just helps to bring out the attack a little. And yeah, that is it for the low end bus. Again, emphasis on if you have really good sounds, you don't need to do a whole lot of stuff, but something like this is still very good and a really good way to kind of tie the low end together in a way that I think will make your track sound a lot more professional, a lot more full. After that, we have the percussion, which sounds like this. So this percussion here can be broken down into like 2 different groups. We have sort of like the main stuff, so we have... This is like the simple thing you would have in maybe like most tracks like this. You know, we have like the shaker and the tambourine layer together doing like tick, tick, tick. And then we have an open hi-hat. You can see this is just a sample. I shortened it a little bit. And then we've got a little bit of a pitch envelope actually. So I don't usually do this with hi-hats. But with this style, you need very punchy hi-hats on the upbeat like this. You know, it really needs to have that like that punch to it. And the pitch envelope's a really great way to do that. Usually I do this on kicks or even snares sometimes. But basically what it does is you're just starting the pitch up here and then really quickly jumping down to the pitch of the sample. And when you do that, you have to kind of think of it like, it adds like this sort of hit to the sound. Here's without the pitch envelope. And then with it, it's really subtle. But you can definitely hear the difference in like how this makes it more punchy in the overall mix. And yeah, and also with the shaker and tambourine, no effects on the shaker. You can see though I did this thing I always do where you kind of drag it forward a little because otherwise it's kind of dragging behind the beat. But if you do this, you get that same shaker sound, but without the like going into it. It's just very like quick. And then on the tambourine, I actually used, you can see I shortened it, and then I used a bit of erosion actually to kind of make it hit more. Here's without it. And then with it, it just kind of makes it a little bit more crunchy, a little bit more textured. You know, with this style, it needs to sound like that, like have that kind of more crunchy textured sound. So that's just doing that, and then we have a utility, converting it to mono using the left ear just because like it had some weird phase stuff going on. But it is a really good tambourine sample, so that solves that. And then finally, we just have a high-pass filter. And then the last one of the sort of like main percussion here is the clap, which sounds like this. So yeah, this one's really simple. You know, it's just like a nice fat clap like you would use in this style of house. I've got a bit of drum bus and then a bit of a high pass filter. And so then after that, we have these other percussions. So all of these layers. These are all sort of like extra layers. And the idea here is that, you know, these are the sort of like subtle things that you don't always hear. These are the things that are like adding a lot to the overall groove, though. I'll show you. So here is the track with these in there. And then without any of that percussion. You can hear this stuff is carrying it along like a lot. And so something I really want to put a lot of emphasis on is like when you're making this style of track, you can't just have like one little percussion sound or even two little percussion sounds. You really need to layer your stuff up like this in the way I've done here and get like multiple different things to really build it up and make it sound full, because these are really going to carry the track along. You know, if you think about it melodically, not much is happening. It's really just one chord the whole way through. So I often look at these elements kind of as more of like the lead in a style track like this, because it is just more percussive and more rhythmic. So the first thing here I'll show you is this drum rack. You can hear we have this little zap sound, which is just made using operator. It's just a square wave going into a pitch envelope, which the pitch envelope is what makes it like. You can hear theirs without that. And then with it, and then I have a little bit of a high pass filter. And then the tom is just a 909 tom. And so these are in here just kind of like adding some nice background percussion. I'd say this is like probably the peak of stuff where like you don't always notice it, but you hear how much energy it's adding when we play it with that hi-hat and clap. And yeah, and then we have this little low tune percussion, which sounds like this. So what this is it's the sound, and then you can see I pitched it down a bunch. I'll pitch it up a little bit so you can hear it. So I took a sound like that, and then I just pitched it down. You know, it's a nice way to kind of do some sound design with it and make it like your own sound. And then I also shortened it with the amp envelope. Then this just plays this little like, you know, every now and then. Again, it's the little subtle things that you don't always notice that are adding a lot to the track. Then we have the snare, which sounds like this. So that's really simple, just like a punchy 909 style snare, plays at the end of every 2 bars. We've got a bit of saturation on that as well. This actually does pick up the groove a lot. When you hear that little, I feel like it says like, here comes the next part, you know? Then we have this little rim shot. So just like an 808 or 909 style rim shot. Again, a lot of drum machine sounds in this style of track. And you can hear that just does that little. Right there. And then the last thing we have here is this extra open hi-hat, which sounds like this. So that just plays every 2 bars as well, just kind of like that little. It's nice. I like having that kind of play off. Like we have the main open hi-hat, and then we get this one. And it kind of like, it's a little bit of an extra thing, you know? So yeah, and then we have the percussion all in a group together. You can see we have a bit of saturation and then just a bit of EQ. So here's without these. And then with them. You can hear it's not doing too much. Even though the saturator is up pretty high, it's really not doing too much. It's just kind of gluing everything together, getting the volume levels a little bit more even. And then we have the EQ8 just cutting out the low end, making sure that it's not going to get in the way of the bass, and giving it a little bit of a high end boost. And then the last layer that we have in here is just this vinyl atmosphere, which sounds like this. So it's just something that I noticed is in a lot of these tracks, you know, just having some kind of vinyl atmosphere like this in the background. And it doesn't even have to be vinyl noise. It could be a lot of different things. But just having this is adding a lot of texture to the sound. You know, it really helps to make it feel like you're in sort of like a particular place while you're hearing the track. And not just like, oh, this is a track, but more to kind of like set the stage, you know? And I'll show you here's without this in the mix. And then with it. So again, it's subtle, but I do think that this adds a lot. And yeah, so that is it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Let me know what you think of the new lighting setup. Like I said in the beginning, you can get the full project file and samples and MIDI and presets. All of that stuff from this video is available in the description. And if you're patient on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.